Most promotions hinge on things nobody writes down. Behind closed doors and in group chats, tiny signals. Who waits to be introduced, who frames the problem, who stays quiet, decide who gets the next project, the raise, or the seat at the table. You've sat through meetings where the official agenda barely mattered and the real decisions popped up over coffee afterward. Because power is traded in side conversations and informal bonds, the loudest case in the room often loses to the person who built alliances in the hallway, on a golf course, or during a late-night call. It stings to realize you were left off an email chain and the outcome was already set. That exclusion isn't random. Who's CC'd, who gets the follow-up, who gets invited to dinner. Those choices test and reveal trust, and trust turns into access to information and opportunities. Noticing these moves feels like learning a new language of influence. You'll see concrete examples, a seat chosen, a name casually dropped, a delayed reply, and understand exactly how those small, unspoken rules shape careers, deals, and who gets to matter. How influence is quietly traded. Decisions often happen in hallways and over coffee, long before an agenda lands in anyone's inbox. People trade introductions like currency. A recommendation from someone already trusted will get you a meeting slot that a cold email never would. When a senior executive quietly tells a hiring manager, first to take them, that offhand endorsement moves proposals and promotions because others assume the endorser has vetted the person. Small favors create invisible ledgers. A single breakfast meeting can translate into a prioritized referral months later. If you once helped arrange a client dinner, the organizer may feel obligated to mention your name when a vacancy opens, and that mention becomes a pathway. This isn't always conscious reciprocity. It's social bookkeeping where the memory of a favor nudges decision makers toward people they owe or trust. Sponsorship and mentorship get confused, but they function differently in practice. Mentors advise quietly. Sponsors use their influence on your behalf. A sponsor will raise your name in private strategy sessions, defend your work in front of partners, or push for you to lead a visible project. Because sponsors risk their own standing when recommending someone, their backing often recalibrates who gets access and who gets sidelined. Access to information is traded in the form of back-channel briefings and selective leaks. A well-placed off-the-record conversation with a reporter or a friendly board member's heads-up about an upcoming policy change shifts how people position themselves. When someone controls who hears what first, they shape the narrative and gain leverage. Others respond to the story already told rather than to the facts independently. Visibility is often exchanged for future leverage. Letting a colleague take public credit on a project can buy you an ally who later opens doors. People also accept symbolic roles, advisory titles, or speaking slots, in return for being included in inner circles where real decisions are negotiated. That quiet trade-off between visible recognition and private access is how reputations are built and deals are steered. The unspoken currency of loyalty. In rooms where deals and favors happen quietly, who owes what to whom often decides the next move more than any written agreement. Power operates on a ledger you can't pull up on paper. Call coverage, discreet introductions, and public defenses are the entries. When someone consistently shows up for another person under visible strain, covering a last-minute pitch, standing beside them in a meeting, keeping a private confidence, that behavior becomes measurable social capital. The effect is straightforward. Visible reliability attracts invitations and second chances. Look at a small company where an early hire cancels plans every time the founder needs help. That person gets trusted with sensitive projects and informal equity conversations later on. In political campaigns, volunteers who stay through a rough weekend are the first people given leadership roles in the next cycle. In close-knit creative teams, the one who protects a risky idea in front of skeptical producers ends up as the person whose projects get funded. Because these acts are observable, they create reputational momentum that others use when deciding whom to back. The signals of loyalty are simple and repeated: presence, discretion, reciprocity, and public backing. A whispered apology to a colleague for a mistake, then defending them in front of a client, is the kind of small pattern that converts into long-term trust. Conversely, a single public betrayal, leaking an internal critique to a rival, for example, can erase years of goodwill. That's cause and effect in human networks. Repeated small favors produce inclusion. Visible breaches produce exclusion. Loyalty carries weight, but it also has limits and consequences that people feel in practical ways. Teams have kept underperformers because they are seen as dependable allies, only to jettison them once the pressure becomes personal and the cost too high. Friend groups that protect a member despite obvious harm can implode when outside scrutiny reveals the cover-ups. These are not moralizing points, they are mechanisms. Protection and tolerance flow toward those who accrue the right kind of favors until the balance shifts. What's traded most often is access and reputation rather than cash. One warm introduction to a decision maker, a quiet note defending someone's character, or shielding a partner from gossip can be worth more than a public promotion. Those reciprocity debts build invisible networks that steer careers and opportunities. You start to realize that in many influential circles you aren't judged by your bank statement, but by the list of people who would vouch for you without hesitation. Why credibility often beats raw skill. Hiring situations often expose the gap between talent and trust. A recruiter is more likely to pick someone with clear references and a portfolio they can verify than a brilliant-sounding resume with no endorsements. Shorter process times result. The reason is simple. A candidate who carries credible proof reduces the employer's risk and the unseen costs of a bad hire, like lost time, team disruption, and reputational damage. When customers choose products, belief in the seller matters more than the product spec sheet. A shopper will click buy faster on an item with dozens of detailed reviews than on an unreviewed product that might be technically superior. That trust translates into higher conversion and fewer returns. Credibility serves as a shortcut that lowers the buyer's perceived uncertainty and the mental energy needed to evaluate alternatives. Inside organizations, being trusted often unlocks resources faster than being the most technically skilled person in the room. A developer who consistently delivers and communicates clearly will get bigger projects and a budget sooner than a lone genius who rarely shares progress. Managers and stakeholders prefer predictable outcomes to theoretical excellence. Over time, that predictable delivery compounds into visible impact and broader influence. In markets and partnerships, reputations act like currency that buys access and patience. Venture firms, clients, and other gatekeepers favor founders and firms with known track records because introductions and deal flow are costly to vet otherwise. That credibility shortens negotiation cycles and opens doors that pure ability alone might not. The flip side is real. Credibility sometimes masks gaps in capability, but in most practical settings, the reduction of perceived risk and the multiplier effects of trust explain why the trusted person often wins out. Exit moves. Leaving without burning bridges. Many professional exits don't end cleanly. Ties fray and opportunities vanish. People remember the tone more than the content, so a curt goodbye can erase years of goodwill. For example, a marketing manager who walked out after a blow-up with a client left the team scrambling and that client quietly moved its budget elsewhere. Referrals dried up and relationships cooled. When bridges burn, the effects are practical. Lost referrals, cut-off references, and diminished chances of future collaboration. Timing matters more than people like to admit. A developer who gives 2 weeks' notice and overlaps with their replacement can hand off key systems smoothly, which keeps product launches on track. If handoffs are rushed, bugs pile up and the remaining team carries the cost. The reputational hit travels with the lever. Saying you'll help during a transition, then following through with clear documentation or brief pairing sessions, preserves both output and respect. How you talk about the exit shapes what happens next. Saying something like first am moving on to pursue a different direction in a calm conversation keeps the focus off conflict, and people are more likely to offer support. Contrast that with someone who vents on social media after a bad meeting. That public airing often closes doors rather than opening new ones. Neutral language, specific offers of help, and private feedback where necessary tend to keep networks intact because they reduce defensiveness and preserve mutual dignity. What happens after you leave is where long-term value appears. A consultant who sent occasional project updates and congratulatory notes kept getting invited back for short-term gigs. Small gestures maintained relevance. If relationships end with gratitude instead of grievance, former colleagues will think of you on future projects. Staying reachable, sharing useful information without expecting anything, and showing up for milestone celebrations turns an exit into a pause rather than a full stop. Decoding signals, listening to what isn't said. A pause after a direct question often tells a clearer story than the sentence that follows. In a job interview, for example, a long quiet moment before an answer can signal uncertainty or a lack of preparation, which then pushes interviewers to rephrase questions or to fill the silence themselves. That shifting of control can change how the candidate is perceived. Often the person who breaks the pause ends up steering the conversation and setting the agenda. Not all signals come from words. The body keeps a running commentary. Crossed arms, feet pointed toward the door, or a quick, involuntary smile in the middle of a critique are small facts that add up into a larger interpretation. In a negotiation, a counterpart who leans back and taps their fingers fast is usually impatient, and that impatience can lead the other side to make concessions they otherwise wouldn't have considered. Misreading those gestures, treating them as rudeness instead of nervousness, changes decisions in predictable ways. Tone and pace carry meaning that punctuation alone cannot capture. A flap that's fine over the phone typically indicates resignation, while the same word spoken with brightness suggests genuine agreement. The medium matters too, since text messages strip out tone and leave room for projection. Customer service representatives know that a rising pitch or repeated hesitations often precede a request for reassurance, and salespeople notice that a sudden speed up in speech can mean someone is thinking of stating a price or objection. When vocal cues are ignored, the conversation becomes prone to misunderstandings that could have been resolved in a single clarifying exchange. Spatial arrangements and turn-taking set an unspoken hierarchy before anyone speaks. Whoever sits at the head of a conference table or who interrupts more frequently ends up defining the group's focus, and quieter participants are often pushed to the margins as a result. At social gatherings, the people who cluster together and exclude others create lanes of inside knowledge, while those left on the edges miss subtle cues and later wonder why decisions felt predetermined. Cultural differences and personal habits complicate every interpretation, so the safest outcome tends to follow from noticing patterns and watching what the silence and the small gestures cause to happen next. Ever stood at the edge of a conversation and felt invisible? Those powerful circles rarely state rules out loud. They send signals with who sits where, which jokes land, and who gets the birthday invite, and missing those signals means you miss chances, like being left out of the investor dinner because you didn't know to mention that one project. Small things make big differences. Reciprocity, reputation, shared language, and controlled invitations are the key levers. When someone at the lunch table is the person who connects two people or remembers names, they get trusted, and when someone repeatedly ignores the tiny norms, they get kept at arm's length. It feels unfair to have rules you weren't taught. If you've been there, you're far from alone, and small reliable moves, showing up, matching tone, returning tiny favors like introducing a useful contact or bringing coffee to a close-knit meeting, tend to open doors because others read those behaviors as trustworthy signals. You don't have to become someone else to belong. There are simple, authentic ways to shift how you're seen. Ask a genuine question, offer one useful thing, learn the group's language over time. And if this resonated, there will be follow-up videos breaking down how to read microsignals, how to reciprocate without overcommitting, and real examples from workplaces and social events. If you want more of that, subscribing makes it easy to catch the next ones.